You think getting a scholarship means you can escape this skin color? Officer Grant Hale shouted on Harper Street, his hand pressing down on the necks of two black twin sisters, one collapsing to the ground, the other screaming in despair. You turned off the camera because you're scared the truth would choke you, didn't you? The older sister's voice rang out, silencing the crowd, and 10 minutes later the entire city watched Hale kneeling in the middle of the street, tears mixing with dust. 1 minute of arrogance traded for a lifetime of disgrace where justice lit up from the fury of those once trampled. If justice has to beg, then the law died in the uniform you're wearing. If that scene unfolded on your street, would you stand by or step forward? What state are you in? The morning in Harper was burning hot, the asphalt reflecting white light onto rows of parked cars, windshields flashing harshly. Twin sisters Noah and Nathan Bell stood beside a faded graffiti wall where an old line read, "In memory of Henry Bell, the man who never looked away." Their dark blue graduation robes stirred slightly in the breeze, their black curls glinting bronze under the sun. Nathan held the camera. Noah smiled, her eyes squinting against the glare. They spoke softly, their voices blending with the city's noise. The screech of tires, the school bell, the hoarse cry of a street vendor. Everything felt peaceful until the low growl of a police engine cut through the morning. The white patrol car stopped in the middle of the street, sunlight flaring across the hood. The door opened, and Officer Grant Hale stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered eyes narrowing against the light. His hand rested on his gun belt as his gaze swept over the two girls before landing on the mural of a black soldier. Nathan's breath caught, but Noah stayed still, gripping her diploma tightly. "What are you two doing here? About to spray paint something?" Hale's voice was dry, stretched thin, colder than the wind. Nathan kept calm, lifted the camera, and smiled politely. "We're taking graduation photos." Her answer was soft but clear in the thick air. Hale took a step closer, his shadow covering them both. "Nice," he said, his smile sharp as a blade. "Maybe your last shot before you end up in a cell." Nathan looked straight at him, eyes bright but edged with fear. Noah frowned, steadying her tone. "What are you talking about? We haven't done anything wrong." "Nothing wrong." Hale raised an eyebrow, his gaze flicking to Noah's neck, where a silver necklace caught the sun. He leaned closer, voice low. "Why wear that? Steal it from someone." Noah stepped back slightly, her fingers brushing the pendant engraved with the name Henry Bell. "It's my father's," she said, slow but firm. "He was a lieutenant in Basra." Hale laughed, the sound dry as metal scraping. "Killed in action. Then he was as stupid as his kids." The air dropped into a choking silence. Nathan drew a deep breath, her arm tightening around her sister's shoulder. A few passers-by stopped. Someone raised a phone, and a handful of eyes turned their way. Noah met his gaze, her voice lowering. "You talk like that to the daughter of a man who served this country." Hale, squinted lips curling. "Whose country? All I see here is trash." His smile thickened the air. Nathan lowered her camera, her hand trembling. "You're crossing the line." Hale stepped closer, the smell of sweat and tobacco mixing his breath short. "The line," he said, "I am the line." Noah stepped forward, half a pace, the distance between them now just breath. "Then you should learn how to keep your humanity inside that boundary." Her words stirred murmurs in the crowd, a few phones lifted to record. Hale glanced around, saw the flicker of lenses, and growled, "Turn those off. This is an administrative check area." Nathan didn't move, her hand steady on the camera, eyes blazing. "You don't have the right," she said, her voice firm. A soft beep followed, and the body cam light on Hale's chest blinked out. Noah looked at the light, then at him, her voice cold. "Why did you turn off the camera?" Hale shrugged, lips curling slightly. "Battery died." Nathan snapped back. "Battery or backbone?" The line sparked a ripple of quiet laughter from the crowd, but that laughter lit a fuse. Hale's jaw tightened and his hand moved to the grip of his gun. "Say that again." Noah took a breath. "I said you turned it off because you're afraid of yourself." In the harsh sunlight, her eyes shone like polished metal. For a moment, silence held. Then Hale stepped forward, grabbing Noah's shoulder and shoving her hard against the wall. The impact sounded dry and sharp. Nathan rushed in. "Let her go." Hale turned, one arm blocking her path, pushing her aside. "Back off before you join your sister." His face flushed red, voice tight with anger. Noah tilted her head, her voice hoarse but clear. "You think power gives you the right to humiliate people?" Hale barked, almost a growl. "I think power means when I say stop, everybody stops." That sentence tore through the stillness of the street. The crowd erupted and a woman yelled, "Don't touch them." A middle-aged man pulled out his phone and zoomed in. Hale turned, tension visible in his eyes, but his hand didn't let go. The heat from the pavement scorched skin, the air thick with melted asphalt and rust. Nathan pushed herself up, her voice cutting through her teeth. "You're tearing down the badge you wear." Hale paused, then let out a laugh cold enough to freeze a room. "This badge doesn't fall. Only people like you do." He reached for his radio and said shortly, "Code 42, disorderly suspect check," but no one responded. The crowd began chanting, phones raised high, camera flashes blinking. Hale suddenly realized he was surrounded by eyes. Noah spoke softly, but every camera picked it up. "So who's really being checked now?" Hale spun his eyes, locking onto the nearest lens. He shouted, "Turn them all off," but no one stopped. Panic slipped into his voice, warping it. Nathan took her sister's hand and tugged gently. "Let's go." Noah kept looking straight ahead, her eyes lit in the sun, standing not from fear but pride. A breeze swept through, carrying a distant siren. 3 shadows stretched across the street, 2 small ones facing a larger one, flickering in the light. In those 10 brief minutes, the joy of graduation turned into a confrontation that would reshape an entire city. At the far end of Harper Street, children paused their games, looking toward the scene, unaware a fire had just been lit and it would burn across America. The engine still roared on Harper Street, waves of heat rising like thin smoke, casting harsh reflections off car windows. The crowd had grown. Some people stopped, others secretly started filming from a distance. Light hit Officer Grant Hale's face, stretching his shadow like a gash across the pavement. He moved closer, fingers tapping slowly on the grip of his gun, the metallic sound sharp and cold. Hale's eyes dropped to Noah Bell's neck, where a silver necklace shimmered, the light catching the pendant, engraved with Henry Bell Lieutenant, Basra, 2004, wearing a dog tag. Hale asked, voice hoarse, each word deliberate. "Or did you steal it from someone?" Everyone nearby heard him clearly. Some glanced at each other, a few shaking their heads in quiet disapproval. Noah stood tall, took a deep breath, a slow fire building in her chest. Her voice rose steady but trembling at the end. "It belonged to my father, Lieutenant Henry Bell, killed in Basra." The sentence dropped like a pebble into still water, sending ripples through the heavy stairs around her. Hale tilted his head slightly, lips curling into a thin smile. Killed in action, then he was as stupid as his kids. His laughter was dry and bitter, echoing through the street like shattering glass. The air shifted. A child selling drinks looked up, gripping the bottle in his hand. Nathan spoke out, her voice catching in her throat. "You don't have the right to say that." Hale turned toward her eyes, narrowing his stare, cold as metal scraping skin. "I have the right to deal with anyone disturbing public order." "Got it," he said, pressing each word like a lesson for children. "Public order," Noah replied. "You're standing on someone else's pain and calling it order." A middle-aged woman stopped walking, hand covering her mouth. Several phones lifted higher, lenses locked on. Hale noticed. His eyes flicked toward the crowd, then back, his smile turning sharper. "Oh, the cameras, huh? Is this how you want your fame now?" Nathan gripped her camera tighter, metal scraping against her skin, light flashing across her face. "If you don't want to be recorded," she said, "then act like someone who was trained." Her words cracked like a whip. Hale raised an eyebrow, stepped forward, and Noah instinctively backed away. "Listen, you two," he growled. "I see your type every day. Flashing awards, scholarships, brown skin in the sun like it makes you special. But in the end, everyone kneels before the law." His smile, twisted lips curling, while his eyes stayed cold. "You're wrong," Noah said. "The law doesn't belong to you. It belongs to everyone, even those you look down on." Her voice dropped, each word heavy. Hale snorted, then lifted a hand to the radio on his shoulder, pressing the button with a soft click. "Code 17, send another unit to Harper Street." He let the radio fall, eyes locking on the camera in Nathan's hand. "Hand that over." Nathan stepped back. "This is personal property. You don't have the right to take it." Hale grabbed the camera strap and yanked hard, but Nathan held on, her small hand clenched like steel. "Let go," she shouted, her voice cracking with anger. Noah stepped in between them, the light flaring across her face like fire. "What are you trying to prove?" Hale tilted his head and replied coldly, "I'm proving that I can." The line made Nathan let out a short, bitter laugh. "Then you're just a thug in a police uniform." The crowd murmured and more phones lifted higher. Hale started to lose his patience, his voice sharper now, his hand trembling slightly. "I'm telling you one last time, put the camera down." Noah looked at him, her eyes no longer afraid, only hard. "My father used to say," she replied, "fear doesn't make a protector. You're proving the opposite." Hale's face flushed red as he shoved Noah hard in the shoulder, making her stumble. Nathan cried out and reached for her sister, but Hale blocked the way, his voice hissing. "I said stop. Are you still arguing?" His tone seemed to drag the sky down with it. A car stopped nearby, the driver leaning out the window yelling, "Hey, what are you doing? They're students." Hale turned and shouted, "Drive on, this is a legal inspection." But doubt flickered in his eyes. Noah stood upright, wiping the blood from her bitten lip, her gaze unsettlingly calm. "If this is what you call legal," she said quietly, "then justice must be lying under your boots." The line dropped into silence. The soft whir of phone cameras continued clicking in a steady rhythm. Hale looked around, realizing he was being filmed from all directions. "Turn off every camera. Now!" he shouted, voice cracking. No one moved. The glow from the screens lit his face like hundreds of watching eyes. Nathan said softly, "So who's in the cell now?" Hale clenched his fists, knuckles popping. He leaned down close to Noah's ear, his voice low and tight with rage. "You just made a big mistake." Noah stared back, her voice firm and low. "No, you just let the whole city see who you are." A gust of wind swept through, lifting dust into the air. Across the street, a passing reporter paused, lens aimed straight at the scene. It all happened in 15 seconds, but long enough that no one would forget. Hale stood in the street, sweat sliding down his neck, face red with fury, while the twin sisters remained side by side, hands clasped tight. Car horns echoed in a line, lights flashing harshly in the sun. In that moment, the city seemed to hold its breath, caught between searing heat and the hum of recording devices, until one voice rose from the crowd. "Justice is watching you now, officer." Car horns echoed across the intersection, blending with the chaotic sounds of a city heading into a scorching noon. The flow of people slowed, and a few cars eased forward to get a look at what lay ahead, where Officer Grant Hale still stood in the middle of the street facing Noah and Nathan Bell, surrounded by light and the eyes of the crowd. The wind carried the burnt smell of asphalt mixed with metallic heat from the idling patrol car. Each heartbeat thumped in sync, the tension stretched tight like a fraying wire. Nathan took a deep breath, her hand trembling slightly, then pulled her phone from her jacket pocket and turned on the camera, the screen flaring to life. Hale saw it immediately, his eyes narrowing, voice cutting the air. "Put the phone down. This is an administrative check." Nathan didn't answer. She held the phone at chest level, the lens clearly capturing Hale's face with sweat running down his temple. "I have the right to record for my own protection," she said, voice steady though her heart raced. The light bouncing off the screen made Hale squint. A soft beep sounded. The red light on his chest camera blinked out. The air seemed to hollow, and a few bystanders sucked in a sharp breath. Noah looked at the body cam, then directly into his eyes. "You just turned it off." Hale shrugged, his tone flat. "Battery's dead." The answer made Nathan let out a short laugh, quiet but soaked in contempt. Noah spoke next, each word low and sharp. "Battery or your conscience." The line landed in the middle of the crowd, and a woman nearby let out a faint gasp. Hale stepped forward, the space between him and Noah now just a few feet, his breath hot and laced with cigarette smoke. "Say that again." His voice was rough, every word gritty. Noah lifted her chin, her eyes catching the harsh sun. "I said, you're afraid to let people see the truth." Silence hung for a few seconds, long enough to hear the roll of tires and the wind scraping across billboard signs. Hale pressed his lips tight fingers, brushing the edge of his gun belt, then stopped. A faint smile crossed his face, not from humor but bitterness. "Truth, huh? Who do you think you are talking to me like that?" He leaned in, eyes locked on Noah's face, his voice low but loud enough for those nearby. "Out here, I decide what truth is." Nathan stepped forward half a pace, raising her phone higher, her voice thin with anger. "Then we'll show the world your truth." Hale lunged, suddenly reaching for the phone, but Nathan dodged just in time, stumbling back and nearly hitting a street lamp. The crowd pressed in closer, voices rising. "Get it on tape. Keep filming." Hale spun around, his eyes flashing, and shouted, "Back off. One more step and you're all under arrest." But the shout no longer sounded like authority, it sounded like fear. A man in a nearby suit raised his phone camera steady, his voice cutting through the noise. He just turned off the body cam. Noah stared directly at Hale, her voice dropping cold as steel. "See, even with the camera off, people are still recording." The glow from surrounding phones cast a pale light on Hale's face. He inhaled sharply, his hand twitching slightly, then sneered. "Record it all. Let's see who they believe, two pieces of trash or a police officer." His words hit the final nerve. Nathan shook her head, eyes glassy but firm. "The truth doesn't need rank, it only needs conscience." A distant siren echoed through the city, as if reminding everyone that a mistake had just been exposed. Hale clenched his fists and stepped closer to Noah, his voice lowering. "You have no idea who you're talking to." Noah didn't flinch. Her gaze was steady and bright. "Someone who's forgotten who they were, taught to protect." That line stopped Hale for half a second, then rage surged. He slammed his hand down on the patrol car's hood, the metallic bang cracking like thunder. "Shut up." The crowd recoiled, but the cameras stayed pointed. Nathan kept her phone steady, her voice soft but clear. "You're recording your own crime." Hale let out a bitter laugh, leaning in close to Noah, his eyes burning. "You think you're a hero? Let's see how long heroes last in jail." Noah drew a breath, her tone light but sharp. "And you, let's see how long you can stand to face yourself." They locked eyes, silence stretched between them like a tightened wire, and that silence felt heavier than any shouting. Another gust of wind swept through, carrying whispers from the crowd. Someone said, "That girl's brave." Another replied, "Not brave, just justice." In that moment, Hale realized he was no longer the enforcer of order, but the center of scrutiny. He turned away, his voice low and tense. "It's over. Leave now." Noah answered, "Justice has never ended just because someone's afraid." Her words made him pause, his finger resting on the radio button, but he didn't press it. Nathan stepped beside her sister, her hand trembling but her eyes steady. "Let's go," she said quietly, but Noah remained still, watching Hale's back as he turned toward the car. The sunlight reflected off the silver badge on his chest, something that once stood for honor, now hollow with pretense. As Hale opened to the door, he glanced back one more time, eyes still burning with anger, but now holding something closer to fear. Noah spoke softly, almost to herself. "If justice has to go dark work to survive, then it's no longer justice." Her words drifted into the heavy heat, leaving behind a chilling silence. Hale's car rolled forward, the sun flaring off the side mirror for a brief moment, reflecting his face, one that had just erased its own belief. At the center of the intersection, the two girls still stood hand in hand, saying nothing more. The horns blared again, pulling the city back into its rhythm. But those who had witnessed knew something had cracked a fracture that would stretch through every frame Nathan had just captured. Wind swept through the Harper intersection, carrying old flyers and scraps of newspaper in spirals across the scorching pavement. Engines roared, horns echoed in the distance, all folding into the stifling air. The crowd had gathered into a half-moon, eyes locked on the middle of the street where Officer Grant Hale still held the upper hand, while Noah and Nathan Bell stood close together, phones still recording. The harsh sunlight bounced off their hair, their tense faces, and the silent rage etched into every furrow and line. Hale stepped forward, his boot crushing a leftover puddle from the night's rain. His voice came through clenched teeth. "Didn't I tell you to stop?" Nathan gripped her phone tighter, the screen casting light back onto Hale's face. "You're abusing your power," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. "Give me the phone," Hale shouted, then suddenly shoved Noah hard. The push was heavy and abrupt, sending her sprawling forward. Her graduation cap flew off, spinning across the sidewalk before dropping into the gutter. Its small impact cut through the silence like a blade. Nathan screamed. "He didn't do anything." She rushed to help her sister up, but Hale blocked her, his body eclipsing the sun, casting a shadow over both of them. "Step back unless you want to join her," he barked, one hand on his baton. The veins in his neck stood out, his voice dry and tense, like anger was something long practiced. Nathan stepped back half a pace, breath uneven, eyes fixed on the black shoes planted in front of her. "We're not causing trouble. You're disrespecting us," she said, her voice fading as she saw him draw the baton from his belt. "Oh, disrespecting you," he sneered, the baton catching the sunlight. "You think your skin makes you special." The words cut through the street like a blade. The crowd stirred with gasps and murmurs. Someone covered their mouth. More phones were raised. Nathan began to cry, tears hitting the searing pavement and vanishing on contact. "You're disgracing your own badge," she shouted. Hale took another step forward, swinging the baton through the air with a sharp scraping sound like metal tearing. Noah was still on the ground, one hand bracing on the rough concrete, her skin scraped and bleeding. She looked up, eyes wide, and in the harsh glare saw the shape of a threat looming above her. Her lips trembled, but her voice came out strangely calm. "My privilege is to live." The words rode the wind, carried clear across to the far sidewalk, freezing the crowd in place. For a second, silence reigned. Then dozens of phones lifted lenses, trained on the heart of the confrontation. An old man, holding a coffee cup, whispered, "What did she just say?" The person beside him replied, "She said the truth." Hale stepped back half a pace, his eyes glinting in the sunlight, then he let out a laugh. It was rough, twisted, sounding more like retreat than defiance. "The right to live," he said. "You think that comes free? Keep your mouth shut if you want to live long." Noah pushed herself up, wiped the blood from her palm, her eyes dusty but still burning bright. "If you need others to stay silent to feel strong, then you were never strong at all." Her voice came out quiet, but it landed like a direct hit to his weakest spot. Hale clenched his jaw, gripping the baton tighter, the light flashing off the tip like a blade. He raised it, ready to step forward, but a voice shouted from the crowd, "Stop! Everyone's filming." A man held up his phone yelling, "I'm live streaming. The whole city's watching." Hale spun around, eyes flashing with alarm, then cursed under his breath. Phone cameras blinked in unison, hundreds of eyes that could not be shut. Nathan held her sister's hand tightly, her breath short. "Let's go," she whispered. Noah shook her head slightly, eyes still locked on Hale. "Justice doesn't run," she replied, her gaze cold and steady. The line stopped Hale mid-motion, his hand frozen in the air. A gust of wind picked up sheets of newspaper, spun across the street and wrapped around his legs. The crowd was shouting shouting, some stepping forward, others calling for calm, but all sounds melted into an ungraspable chaos. A small child clutched their mother's hand and whispered, why's the policeman doing that?" The woman held her child tighter, eyes fixed on the scene, but gave no answer. Noah looked around and saw dozens of eyes, each phone shaken in the hands of strangers. She knew now she wasn't alone. Dust clung to the blood on her palm, burning, but she kept her hand clenched. Hale lowered his baton, his gaze drifting across a crowd that no longer gave him the obedience he once commanded. A strong gust of wind dragged the graduation cap from the gutter, soaked through the deep blue, streaking as it skidded across the pavement and came to rest beside Hale's boot. Noah bent to pick it up, water dripping from the rim. She smoothed it gently, then looked up, her voice cool and calm as ice. "My father once said, anyone who enforces a law must understand the pain of those punished by it. You never did." Hal opened his mouth but couldn't speak. She placed the cap in Nathan's hands and turned, walking toward the light at the end of the street. The crowd parted, each person watching the two figures fade into the distance, leaving behind an officer with a baton still in his hand, heavy as the silence pressing down on him. The wind kept blowing, scattering trash, the sound of cameras still rolling, and somewhere someone whispered, "A city will change because of a single push." Noon felt like the whole sky crashing onto Harper Street, sunlight spilling through the windows, flashing sharply across the silver badge on Officer Grant Hale's chest. The air was the heat rising from the asphalt, making everything waver like melting glass. The crowd now filled half the intersection, voices, shouting, horns, blaring ragged breaths, blending into a strangled hum. At the center of it all, Hale pressed Noah Bell's head to the pavement, his knee locked against her neck, his hand forcing her shoulder down. She struggled weakly, her breath breaking, her lips barely moving. "I can't." The sound slipped away into the noise, but Nathan heard every word. She lunged forward, screaming, "Let her go. She can't breathe." Her voice cracked raw with fear. Hale barked, "Shut up." His other arm swung hard, the baton slamming into Nathan's shoulder with a dry, brutal thud that sent her collapsing. Pain ripped through her chest, her trembling hand pushing against the ground as she looked toward her sister, pinned beneath him. Noah's fingers clawed at the street, her head-tilted hair clinging with sweat and dust. Her knees tried to lift for leverage, but Hale's weight crushed her throat. Her face turned pale, her lips purple, her breath fading thin. He turned off the camera. "Record this," a voice shouted from the crowd. A man raised his phone, yelling through the chaos. "Film everything now." Dozens of hands lifted at once, cameras aimed at the same spot where light flared off the street, where a human being was pinned for daring to stand tall. Hale turned his head, seeing a wall of lenses pointed at him. His jaw twitched, eyes flaring with panic. "Back off," he shouted, but no one moved. Nathan dropped to her knees, clutching her shoulder as she crawled forward. "You're killing her," she rasped. Hale didn't answer. His hands pressed down harder, his whole body bearing down. Noah tried to speak, but the words came out only as air. "I can't." Each word sliced the air like a blade, thin and sharp. Sweat ran down Hale's forehead, dripping onto the ground, mixing with dust. He didn't look at her, only stared at the pavement as if trying to bury himself inside the power that had turned monstrous. A woman screamed, her voice breaking. "What are you doing? She's not moving." Others stepped forward, some filming, some crying. Nathan reached out her hand, gripping Hale's leg, her voice choking. "Stop. You'll regret this." He turned, eyes bloodshot, shouting, "Stand back. This is a lawful duty." But no one believed him anymore. The sound of recording filled the air, flashes pulsing each frame, capturing living proof. Noah tried to breathe, her lungs burning, heat searing from within. Her vision blurred, but in that brief moment she saw her father's face, his smile in the photo on the wall, his voice saying, "Never bow your head to what's wrong." She opened her eyes, looked up at the blazing sky, and her lips moved. Her final breath escaped with the words, "If my father saw this, he'd be ashamed of your skin." The sentence dissolved into the air, but struck like a slap across Hale's pride. He froze for half a second, eyes losing focus, his body going still. All sound seemed to vanish. Then he shot upright, lifting his knee from her neck, standing rigid, his face pale as paper breath heaving. The crowd erupted in shouts. People rushed toward Noah, and others turned their phones to Hale, screaming, "Did you hear her? Did you hear what she said?" Nathan crawled over and held her sister, her shoulders shaken. "Noah, look at me," she whispered. "I'm here." Noah blinked slowly, her lips parting, breath thin as a thread. Hale stepped back, arms hanging limp, his eyes locked on his own hands, the same hands that had just pinned down someone innocent. He turned toward the crowd, saw their furious faces, the phones still raised. Every lens was now a mirror, and in them he saw himself, a man who had lost his humanity. A new siren wailed in the distance. Backup was coming, but no one looked away. All eyes were fixed on the girl gasping for air, the sister kneeling beside her, and the officer retreating, trembling. Nathan looked up, tears mixed with sweat, her voice cutting through the heat. "Justice is coming. You can't kill it no matter how hard you try." Hale backed away, the light catching the sweat and dust around his mouth. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out, only the rasp of breath. In that moment, everything seemed to stop. The wind stilled. The sun held its place. All that remained was Nathan's racing heartbeat and Noah's fading breath. The crowd began to move, some calling for help, others crying, some still filming. And above it all, Noah's last words hung in the air heavier than any sentence. "If my father saw this." The echo lingered through Harper Street like a curse on the man who had forgotten the meaning of the badge he wore. Hale sank onto the curb, head in his hands, eyes hollow. The rage from before had drained away, leaving only fear. In 58 brief seconds, the city had captured a video that would change everything. The wind passed through, carrying voices from the crowd, sobs, gasps, and the truth that had just been revealed. On the shimmering street, Hale's shadow flickered broken into shards of light, an image beginning to collapse. That afternoon, the sun still hung above the glass towers of the city, its light pouring down onto the crowded streets as if to expose the truth that had just unfolded. The scene on Harper Street quickly became the center of attention, spreading like oil on the wind. It all started with a single clip, only 58 seconds long. The scream of Nathan Bell, Noah's broken breath, the hoarse roar of the crowd, all captured from dozens of angles, layered into a chaotic symphony as terrifying as it was real. Within 4 hours of being posted, the video titled "Cop Kneels On Graduate" had surpassed 5 million views with hundreds of thousands of shares. The name Grant Hale became the hottest keyword of the day. Online comments poured out like a flood. He turned off his body cam. Who are the Bell sisters? 58 seconds of America's shame. Bell Brothers, Justice, 58 seconds. Rage spread like an electric shock. Every viewer who watched the video seemed to clutch their chest at the 18th second when Hale pressed his knee into the girl's neck and Noah's eyes lost focus. Under millions of eyes, those 58 seconds stopped being a moment and became an indictment of power pushed past human limits. News channels began replaying the footage on loop, an endless reel that the city could no longer look away from. On screen, Hale could be seen kneeling, the raised hands of the crowd surrounding him. Nathan's voice screaming, "You're killing her." And finally, Noah's voice, faint but sharp as steel. "If my father saw this, he'd be ashamed of your skin." That line was quoted everywhere, headlining news reports, spreading like a curse aimed straight at the heart of America. The police department rushed to hold a press conference. A spokesperson stood at the podium, voice tight with restraint. "We're investigating. The incident appears to be a regrettable misunderstanding during a standard administrative procedure." Every word chosen carefully, cold and vague, like mist settling over a spreading bloodstain. When asked about the deactivated body cam, the spokesperson replied curtly, "Technical malfunction." Those two words stirred the entire room. What kind of technical malfunction stops someone from breathing? A young reporter shouted, but her mic was swiftly cut. Outside, crowds gathered in front of the police station, phones held high, their screens glowing like thousands of torches. Nathan stood in the middle of the sea of people, still clutching the soaked graduation cap, her face pale, but her eyes no longer afraid. She spoke briefly into a reporter's camera. "If they call this a malfunction, we call it a crime." Her words were replayed on the evening news, paired with the image of a young black woman with burning eyes and storm-wind curls. Meanwhile, Hale was placed on temporary suspension. He sat alone in a closed room at the police department, yellow light dimly shining on his hands still marked red. His eyes were blank, drifting off into the badge that had been removed from his chest and now lay on the table. The commanding officer knocked and placed a paper in front of him. "Suspension order, just temporary." Hale said nothing, only nodded slightly, his hand trembling. In the corner, his phone buzzed nonstop with messages, emails, threats, curses, and screenshots from the video flooding the internet. On the streets, traffic moved, but no one seemed to care about signals or the flows of people. In every cafe, every office, every dorm room, people were talking about one thing, 58 seconds. Some called it proof of truth, some called it a stain that can't be erased, and some just fell silent and shook their head. A high school teacher showed the clip in class, then stopped it halfway and said, voice choked, "This is what we've allowed for too long." Amid the media storm, just when people thought they had seen it all, an anonymous account appeared. The username had only 2 letters, Echo. Under the brief title, "The Rest of the Truth," a second clip was uploaded. It opened with the inside of a patrol car, low-angle, camera, dim lighting, but enough to see Grant Hale's face, sweat gathering on his forehead. He was inserting the body cam memory card into the laptop mounted in the car, then clicking to delete multiple files. A faint voice could be heard his own muttering, "No one needs to see that." Then the screen went dark. Within 10 minutes, the clip spread even faster than the original. Thousands of comments appeared under every repost. He knew exactly what he was doing. Deleting evidence isn't a malfunction. It's a crime. Who is Echo News Channels interrupted regular programming for emergency coverage. The outrage had gone beyond the city, reaching distant states where people began gathering with signs that read, 58 seconds for truth. Nathan watched the video from a hospital room where Noah still lay unconscious, a breathing tube beside her. The screen's glow lit her face, reflecting pain and resolve as one. She whispered to herself, "You said it. Justice doesn't run." Outside the window, dusk settled. Streetlights flickered on golden dots, trembling like the breath of a city beginning to wake. On the other side of town, in a dark apartment, the person behind the upload echo closed the laptop, the room's only light going out. Rain began to fall steady and cold. Somewhere out there, a real storm was forming, not from wind, but from millions who had just realized they had been silent for too long. And in the eye of that storm, the name 58 Seconds had become a symbol for pain, for truth, and for a country beginning to face itself. Night fell over the city like a heavy curtain, and light from thousands of torches and phones lit up the central square. Waves of people stretched from the city hall steps all the way to Harper Street, where everything had begun. The chants rolled through the crowd, bouncing off the buildings and returning like thunder. Say their names, Noah and Nathan Bell. Tens of thousands of voices merged hoarse with wind and fury. Signs were held high, letters painted in bold white. 58 seconds is enough, justice can breathe too. The smell of torch smoke mixed with melted plastic from security barriers filled the thick, stifling air, but no one backed it down. In the crowd, an elderly woman with silver hair and a worn sweater stepped out from the front line. Pinned to her chest was an old police badge, its metal dull in the firelight. She removed it, her hand trembling but her eyes steady. Then she dropped it to the ground. The sound it made was soft but cold. "Justice has no color," she said, her voice rough yet louder than any speaker. The square went silent for a few seconds, then the chants roared back stronger, rising like a wave. People near her bowed their heads, some cried, some held each other's hands, and thousands of phones lifted at once to capture the moment. At the center of the square, a temporary screen showed footage of Nathan Bell. She wore a simple white shirt, her hair tied back, eyes swollen from sleepless nights. A microphone stood in front of her, dozens of live cameras trained on her face lit so clearly that every line of exhaustion showed. Beneath the noise of the crowd, her voice came slowly but steadily. "I don't want revenge. We don't want hate. We just wanted to breathe." For a moment, no one spoke. The wind passed through, carrying the sound of flags flapping. A brown-skinned man behind her held his young daughter and lowered his head. A blonde student gripped her friend's hand, eyes red. The crowd stood still as if breathing together. Then, clapping began, scattered at first, then building into a downpour of sound that swept through the square. Chants followed. "We can breathe. We are not afraid." They rose into the dome of night, startling a few late sparrows into flight. Nathan looked out at the sea of people through the screen, the light reflecting in her eyes like fire. She continued, her voice soft but unwavering. "My sister is lying in a hospital, but her voice is still here with all of us. If 58 seconds can take one breath away, then these 58 seconds will awaken millions more." As she finished, the crowd lifted their hands, their phones lighting up to form a massive field of stars. They chanted again, as if sharing one heartbeat across thousands of bodies. Noah, Bell, Nathan, Bell. Above the city, media helicopters circled the sound of their rotors, blending with the chants below, forming the noise of a movement that could no longer be stopped. Major news outlets streamed the scene live, with millions watching online and flooding the screen with comments. "I'm crying. This is the first time I've seen America look itself in the eye. That girl spoke for all of us." It no longer felt like a protest. It had become a reflection of conscience. In the distance, parked across from Central Park, Grant Hale sat motionless in his car. Torchlight flickered in the windshield, casting a blade-like glow across his face. Sweat gathered on his forehead, rolling down his temple. On the phone screen inside the car, Nathan's speech played clearly, her voice trembling but striking every nerve. "We just want to breathe." Hale gripped the steering wheel, knuckles pale. Each word hit like a hammer. He switched channels, but the video appeared everywhere, in every broadcast, in every comment thread, as if the whole world were staring directly at him. The red glow of the traffic light lit his face, revealing eyes cracked open with fear. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead to the wheel, breath, short hands shaking. A sudden image flashed in his mind. Noah's face, as she was pinned down, her eyes not filled with blame, only disappointment. The scene repeated again and again, clearer each time, more painful with each replay. He tried to push it away, turned on the radio, but every station spoke about him. Officer Grant Hale. Second clip shows data deletion. Protests spread across 10 states. Every word pierced like a needle. Outside the car, more people continued pouring into the square. They sang, they cried, they shouted the sisters' names like a vow. A group of high school students held a hand-drawn sign, "We learned from 58 seconds." An elderly couple laid flowers on the steps and stood silently. A violin played somewhere at the edge of the street, fragile but full of feeling, the melody weaving into the crowd's noise, stretching like one shared breath across thousands of hearts. Inside the car, Hale stared out, eyes vacant. The chants echoed through the glass, but all he could hear was Nathan's voice repeating in his mind, "We don't want revenge. We just want to breathe." Sweat dripped down, landing on the steering wheel into the heavy silence. The square's light still reached the windshield, washing his face in a damp orange hue, part fire, part something burning from within. That night, as the clock struck midnight, the chants did not stop. The city held its breath in a collective awakening, and Hale, in the small car, sat with his head bowed and the dark hands still gripping the wheel, but his eyes no longer fixed on the present. He knew it wasn't just him on trial. A whole system was starting to shake, and for the first time in his life, Grant Hale felt truly afraid, not of losing his job, but of what he might have just awakened, something larger than any power he had ever believed in. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the frosted glass of the city police headquarters, casting lines across the cold gray walls. The air in the internal meeting room was so heavy it felt like it could be sliced. On the table sat a thick stack of files, printed images, timelines, and logs from surveillance footage. Grant Hale sat in the center chair, his back slightly hunched, face pale as if the blood had drained from it. Across from him sat the Internal Affairs team, their stares colder than any set of handcuffs. The only sounds were the low hum of the air conditioner and the steady tapping of a pen against the table. Richard Cole, head of Internal Affairs, stood and placed the file on the table with deliberate force. "You said the camera malfunctioned." His voice wasn't loud, but every word carried weight. Hale looked up, eyes tired. "Yes, the battery warning came on then. What's this footage from the backup unit?" Cole cut him off, slamming a hand on the table, the sound cracking like thunder in the closed room. The projector lit up the screen behind him, playing a clip. Hale, that very afternoon, looking down at his body cam, pressing the button, the red light shutting off. Then a faint smirk. Tight Cole. "No one's gonna see this," he said clearly. The image froze at that moment, locked on Hale's face, freezing the entire room. All eyes were fixed on him. A few younger officers turned away, unable to watch. Hale opened his mouth, throat dry as sand. I didn't know that part was still saved." The words crumbled into the thick silence. No one replied. An older officer shook his head and tapped his pen 3 times on the table. The sound landed like a verdict. Cole stepped closer, his voice low but sharp. "You know the recording law, don't you? Turning off your body cam is a criminal offense. So why did you do it?" Hale looked down, his hands, clenched fingernails pressing into skin. He stopped, voice catching. "I just did what everyone else has done." The words left his mouth slowly thin, but so heavy that the entire room seemed to stop. Cole froze, then tilted his head, locking eyes with him, blinking slowly as if hearing something familiar that he didn't want to accept. "Everyone else? Who do you mean?" Hale didn't answer, only stared up at the ceiling, his eyes clouded like someone who had lost all direction. At the end of the table, a young female officer placed her notes down, her hands trembling. Her voice was soft. "Sir, over the last 3 years, there have been 11 body cam signal failures in Officer Hale's patrol area. 6 of those were during shared shifts with other officers who have since resigned." Her words were quiet but sharp, and the air grew even heavier. Cole turned sharply, eyes blazing. "Are you suggesting this system has been covering up crimes?" The young woman didn't respond. She only looked at Hale, her eyes filled with sorrow. The screen remained on, replaying the video in slow motion. Hale's smile looped again and again, like a confession stuck in endless rewind. Another officer, gray-haired, sighed. "How many times, Richard, how many times have we heard that line?" No one answered. The phrase, "I just did what everyone else has done," echoed in their heads, a reminder that the rot wasn't in one man, but inside the very walls of this place. Cole looked around, his voice hoarse. "We're taught the camera protects both sides, but who protects us when the one wearing it chooses to turn it off?" He turned to Hale. "Do you understand what you've done?" Hale nodded slowly, his lips trembling. "I understand." Cole grabbed the file and threw it onto the table. "From now on, no one gets to say technical malfunction again. As of today, all body cams in the district will be monitored against each other. And you, Grant Hale, are hereby placed in internal custody pending investigation." Hale didn't react. His eyes stayed fixed on the screen where his own image still played, a man, lowering his head, shutting off the one thing that might have cleared his name. He remembered the feel of his finger on the button that day. The soft beep now echoed in his mind like a judgment bell. His own words repeated back at him line by line. "No one's gonna see this." He shuddered. Turns out he was watching it now, really watching for the first time, seeing the full weight of what he used to call routine. In the corner of the room, a young officer bowed his head and whispered to the colleague beside him, "If he's telling the truth, where's the line between orders and crimes?" The other answered softly, "There is no line, only the moment people choose to stay silent." The whispers drifted across the table, landing in every ear. No one objected, no one confirmed. They all all sat still and let silence take the floor. Cole closed the folder and exhaled deeply, his voice heavy. "I used to think we had a few bad apples. Now I'm afraid the whole barrel's gone." He signaled to two security officers. They stepped forward and placed their hands on Hale's shoulders. He rose slowly like someone wakened from a long dream. Light from the window touched his face, pale and exposed. Before being led away, Hale turned once more to the screen. The video had frozen on the frame of his half-smile, sunlight reflecting off his cheek. He murmured, barely audible, "I thought people did it just to make life easier." Cole heard him, but said nothing. He simply switched off the screen, and the room went dark. In that darkness, there was a silence more frightening than the roar outside, the silence of those who had seen the truth but weren't ready to face it. Beyond the thick glass, the protest sirens echoed faintly, persistently, like the breath of a city demanding an answer. The city press room in the late afternoon was dim with sunlight, the air filled with the smell of old coffee and paper. Rows of computer monitors lined the desks, the clatter of keyboards filling the room as news updates about the Grant Hale incident dominated every headline. In the corner, Nyla Torres, an independent reporter who had followed numerous police cases, sat beside a stack of documents just received from an anonymous source. On her desk were 3 thick files tied with red string, their covers still marked with faded archival stamps. She opened them one by one, eyes scanning the hastily printed titles: Southside Incident, Allegation of Excessive Force, Wrongful Arrest on Maplewood, Coerced Confession, Case Closed 2020. Under each report, the same phrase appeared: insufficient evidence. Nyla leaned back in her chair, fingertips brushing the paper's surface, the dry, rough texture seeming to carry the dust of time. Each file was an unfinished story, a voice once stifled by cold and familiar phrases. She scribbled quick notes, layering numbers over one another, dates, locations, complainants, the officer assigned. At the signatures section, one line made her stop, her eyes locking onto the italicized print, faded but still legible. Officer Grant Hale, internally reprimanded in 2019 for violation of recording procedures. Next to it was a handwritten note in messy blue ink, body cam turned off during civilian restraint. She sat still, slowly piecing together the scattered fragments. 2019, 4 years ago, meant Hale had already been warned, even investigated. But the case was closed with 2 familiar words: case resolved. Nyla opened another digital folder, searching by file number, and immediately a long list of similar complaints appeared, all ending the same way. She took a deep breath, her fingers trembling slightly as she typed a new note: pattern in behavior. System ignored warnings. The soft hum of the air conditioner above made the room feel colder. Light from the screen cast pale reflections on Nyla's face, her eyes darkening as a wave of anger and helplessness rose within her. She thought of the video from the day before, the moment Hale leaned down, switched off his body cam, and smiled. No one's gonna see this. That sentence now felt like a confession with a history. She looked at the 2019 note, then 2023, then at the small line of text at the bottom: case dismissed per recommendation of Regional Security Chief. Nyla closed the file, her fingers pausing at the spine of the stack, the sound of millions of keyboards typing the same name echoing in her mind. In that moment, she understood that Hale wasn't an isolated case. He was a product fed by silence. She opened her notebook and wrote the first line of her new report. His name didn't disappear from the records. It was just hidden until someone dared to open them again. Below the working title, she underlined the phrase, "the habit of turning off the truth," then looked out the window where the sunset was casting a deep red over the city. In that moment, Nyla knew she had touched the heart of a wound where truth had been shut off along with the very cameras designed to protect it. Nyla sat sat in front of her screen, the blinking cursor on the title bar making her thoughtful. The documents lay scattered, each note, each line marked insufficient evidence, suddenly linking into a complete chain of logic. She reread everything again slowly and carefully, then typed the opening line of the new piece. Some silences don't come from fear, from systems built to protect wrongdoing. The words appeared cold but precise. She leaned back, eyes on the wall lined with photos from similar cases from Minneapolis, St. Louis to Dallas. They all bore the same mark body cam off data missing victims blame. She realized this silence wasn't accidental. It had been nurtured through every procedure, every meeting, every carefully written report meant to dodge accountability. In that moment, Nyla felt a chill run down her spine. Every piece of evidence she had gathered pointed to the same conclusion. This silence was structured. It had layers, rules, beneficiaries, and enforcers. Every time a complaint was dismissed, someone got promoted. Another officer was protected, and a civilian disappeared from the headlines. She looked at the timeline on her screen each year, marked with events that faded like history being erased by the very hands meant to record it. A quiet anger spread through her body, but so did a growing resolve. She knew this article, if published, would make many uncomfortable, but staying silent now would make her complicit. Her fingers typed rapidly, the rhythm of the words falling like rain pounding against glass. The headline appeared sharp and clear. The habit of turning off the truth. She laid out the evidence, listed the incidents, quoted the statements, the recordings, and even the image of Hale smiling before turning off his body cam. There was no accusation, no judgment, only facts laid side by side, enough for readers to draw their own conclusions. The article ended with a single sentence, clean and cutting. No one needs to turn off a camera to protect justice unless justice has nothing to protect. When the article was published, she turned off the screen, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath. 3 hours later, her phone buzzed nonstop. Her inbox, flooded headlines spread across major networks. The habit of turning off the truth. Independent journalist exposes the mechanics of silence. Within half a day, the piece had climbed to the #1 trending spot nationwide. Millions of shares, thousands of comments from citizens, lawyers, even former officers thanking her for writing what no one wanted to face. The screen replayed the image of Hale in handcuffs with a caption quoting directly from Nyla's article. That evening, Nyla left the newsroom walking past quiet blocks where the streetlights shimmered on rain-slick sidewalks. She didn't feel victorious, only the weight of a heavy silence. The truth had been brought into the light, but it still lay within a system curling inward in fear. Still in the glow, reflecting off the window, she saw her face clearly and understood that sometimes an article doesn't change the world, but it can force the world to look directly at itself. A misty morning blanketed the city, and the Central Hospital lay under a pale light like a sheet of paper. The scent of antiseptic and the soft glide of rubber soles over tile floors blended into a steady rhythm. On the 3rd floor in the room, marked with Noah Bell's name, everything was so white it seemed to blur into itself. On the bed, the young woman lay still among tubes, her face pale as glass. Beside her, Nathan sat upright, eyes dark with fatigue, fingers gripping a silver necklace engraved with their father's name, her fingertips pressing into the cold metal. Light filtered through the small window, glinting off the necklace and catching on the thin scar at her wrist, the trace of that fall. A young nurse entered, carrying a tray of medicine, her eyes pausing on Noah before she began to cry softly. "She's only 18, she whispered, her voice dissolving into the hum of the ventilator. Nathan looked up at her with tired eyes, her lips trembling as she fought to stay composed. What did the doctor say? Still unconscious, but her heart's beating steady. The answer made Nathan nod slightly, unaware of the tears slipping down her cheeks. She stepped closer to the bed, and placed a hand gently on her sister's shoulder. Noah's body was warm but unresponsive, her breathing so faint it barely lifted the thin blanket. Nathan leaned down, whispering into the silence, "You told me not to be afraid. I'm here now. Can you hear me?" Outside, the window rain from the night before had left streaks along the glass, reflecting the flash of an ambulance passing by. Nathan remembered the afternoon at the square, thousands chanting their names, a scene now fading like a distant dream. She opened her phone, watched the video of her speech replaying millions of views, millions of comments. But here in this room, those numbers meant nothing. Out there, the world was shouting for justice, but true justice lay silent in front of her, still beneath white bandages. An older doctor entered, his posture firm, his face stern but his eyes kind. He reviewed the monitor readings, gave a small shake of his head, then turned to Nathan. "Her condition is stable, but whether she wakes up is another matter." The words squeezed Nathan's chest as if an invisible hand had wrapped around her heart. She forced a smile and thanked him, then sat back down, her fingers still clinging to the necklace. The image of their father rose in her mind, the man in uniform who always told them strength isn't in muscle, it's in how you keep your humanity on the battlefield. Now, those words rang loud and clear, and Nathan broke down in sobs. She pressed her forehead against the back of Noah's hand, the scent of antiseptic mixing with the familiar warmth of skin. "If you can hear me, don't leave me," she choked out. "I still owe you a graduation photo." The steady beep of the heart monitor echoed softly, each pulse a flicker of hope. Out in the hallway, a few reporters waited, the loudspeaker calling for blood donors mixed with the sounds of rolling carts and nurses calling patients. Nathan closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and whispered as if to no one, "We'll live not for revenge, but to make them see." She lifted her head, the light from the window washing over her face, cleansing it of exhaustion. In that blindingly white room, the image of the two sisters was etched into the air, one lying still at the edge of life, the other holding herself against the weight of despair. Outside, sirens echoed as the city kept moving, but here time had paused, listening to each fragile breath, clinging to something more precious than justice, the right to keep on existing. In the hallway, the camera lights flickered across the tile floor, casting trembling reflections. The scent of stale coffee, antiseptic, and the rush of footsteps blended into a thick wall of sound. Reporters stood shoulder to shoulder, microphones, raised cameras ready to capture every moment. The door to room 307 was the focus, all eyes fixed on the nameplate. Noah Bell. The woman an entire country was waiting on for a sign of life. Nathan stepped out, eyes, sunken face, pale from sleepless nights. In her hand, she still held the silver necklace engraved with her father's name, the one thing anchoring her in the chaos of lights and noise. A male reporter spoke up, his voice slightly shaken with emotion. "Miss Bell, how is Noah? Any updates?" Nathan paused, fingers tightening around the necklace, the camera lights glinting off her eyes, making them shine through the gray of fatigue. "She's still fighting, Nathan," said her voice hoarse but steady. The hallway fell silent for a moment. Then more questions came at once. "Do you trust the court to handle this fairly? Are you concerned for your safety? What would you say to those protesting in the square?" Each question cut like a small blade pressing deeper. But Nathan stood tall, eyes unwavering. She took a deep breath, turned to the frosted glass of the hospital room where the green monitor lights still blinked. She knew the crowd outside was waiting for a quote strong enough to ignite the fire already smoldering, but she had no intention of feeding more hatred. When she turned back, she looked straight into the largest lens, her lips barely moving, her voice clear and cold. "If she doesn't wake up, justice will not sleep." The words echoed down the hallway, each syllable striking the quiet air so sharply that every camera seemed to freeze for a split second. A nurse passing by turned to look, eyes welling up. Lights flashed nonstop, microphones thrust toward her, dozens of hands reaching to catch every word. Nathan held her gaze steady, unwavering, unflinching, her voice rising through the bursts of camera flashes. "We're not here for pity. We're here for awakening. If justice can still breathe, it will never stay silent." The hallway erupted in whispers, and someone said, "She's as strong as a sister lying in that room." After the reporters began to disperse, Nathan quietly walked back to the door. Through the clear glass, she saw her reflection overlapping Noah's still body, the two figures merging in the pale green light. She placed a hand against the glass and whispered, "You heard that, didn't you?" Silence returned, broken only by the rhythmic hum of the ventilator and outside the long wail of an ambulance siren echoing like a promise just spoken. In that dim morning, as the lights faded down the corridor, people understood that a single sentence could wake an entire city, and Nathan Bell, with that voice alone, had made justice open its eyes and look at itself. Houston's morning was soaked in rain, the sky wrapped in a gray mist, and each droplet on the courthouse steps felt like a signal of the judgment to come. A long line had formed outside, umbrellas merged into a sea, the murmurs of the crowd blending with the constant clicks of camera shutters. At the highest step, the heavy wooden doors opened, and Grant Hale was escorted in by two officers, his wrists shackled, the cuffs catching every flash of light. Cameras burst like thunder, the relentless flashes lighting up his pale face. Every step he took was swarmed by hundreds of lenses, each frame slicing away what remained of his composure. He kept his head down, shoulders trembling, breath fogging in the damp cold as rainwater trickled down from his hair into the collar of his prison uniform. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick and tense, the smell of old wood and case files mixing with stale coffee. The public seating was full, many still in raincoats, eyes fixed on the defendant's table. Nathan Bell sat in the front row, clutching her father's necklace, her eyes locked on the man who had left her sister motionless. As Hale passed by, their eyes met for the briefest moment, sharp and clean like a blade. The chaos of Harper Street was gone, no more chants or camera lights, only two people now sharing a room, forced to face the cost. Hale's defense attorney, a silver-haired man, stood and adjusted his tie, his voice even trying to maintain calm. "Your Honor," he began, "my client, Officer Grant Hale, was under threat while performing his duties, and his actions were in self-defense." The words landed in the courtroom like a stone, and the room stirred with whispers. Some let out soft mocking laughs, and others exchanged glances and shook their head. Nathan leaned forward, her eyes flaring with anger. Behind Hunter, a reporter scribbled quickly, "Hale, self-defense from whom?" The prosecutor, a young woman with black hair, stood, her hand firm on the table, her voice cold as steel. "Self-defense from an unarmed girl pinned beneath his knee." "Is that what he claims?" The room fell silent. Hale shut his eyes, fists clenched, the chains at his wrists rattling softly. The defense lawyer tried to speak, but the prosecutor's voice cut sharper, louder this time. If it was self-defense, why was the camera turned off? If it was danger, why did he smile? A technician stepped forward and activated the large screen in the center of the courtroom, playing the recovered footage. The image showed Hale turning off his body cam, a faint smile flickering, then the clear voice, "No one's watching." The playback froze the air. No one dared to breathe. In the front row, Nathan bowed her head, her hand trembling as her lips pressed tight, holding back emotion. Hale opened his eyes, seeing himself on the screen, the light casting over his face, exposing every line carved by guilt. The judge tapped the gavel gently, his voice low. "Order in the court." The words rang out, but they weren't enough to quiet the murmurs still simmering. Outside, the rain grew heavier, striking the window like a ticking countdown. Hale took a deep breath, his gaze unsteady, and when his attorney leaned over, he whispered, "Say nothing more." But Hale kept looking toward Nathan, his eyes pleading, laced with fear. Nathan didn't respond, only tightened her grip on the necklace as if clinging to the last ounce of pride her family still carried. The prosecutor gathered her files, walking slowly back to her seat, her eyes never leaving Hale. "A threat is someone holding a gun," she said, voice calm and nearly a whisper. "Not someone, begging to breathe. Outside the window, lightning split the gray sky. The gavel struck again, closing the first morning of the trial. Justice had not yet been declared in that room, but everyone knew there was no turning back now, not for anyone. Nathan sat silently in the front row, her eyes following each exchange between the prosecutor and defense. She heard every line of defense, every phrase repeated like an empty shield, self-defense threat in the line of duty. A choking wave rose in her chest, heavy and unrelenting. The image of Noah, lying motionless in the hospital, returned her voice echoing in Nathan's mind. Justice doesn't run. As the prosecutor finished her question, Nathan rose, stepping out from the audience bench. The soft rustle of fabric and the tap of her cane against the floor turned every head in the courtroom. She drew a long breath, the light from the window catching her cheeks now streaked with tears. Her voice rang out hoarse but clear, drawn from the deepest part of her pain, self-defense by turning off a camera and beating someone unarmed. The question dropped into the heavy room, echoing off the walls like a sharp discomfort for anyone still trying to believe the defense. Hale's lawyer froze, glancing sideways at his client, unsure how to respond. Hale lowered his head. Hands clenched the cuffs at his wrists, creaking faintly, chillingly. The prosecutor stood still, looking at Nathan with quiet admiration, as if she had spoken on behalf of hundreds of voices trapped within these walls. The judge raised the gavel to speak, then paused. He looked at the trembling young woman, then scanned the courtroom where every gaze had turned in the same direction. A few people in the courtroom began to nod, then the first clap sounded soft as a breath. Then came the second, then the third, and within seconds the whole room erupted into applause like waves crashing ashore. Mixed into that sound were stifled sobs, quiet crying, gathered in the corner of the room where a few women held each other, hands covering their mouths. A reporter lowered his head to right his camera, trembling in his hands from emotion he couldn't contain. The officer at the door looked around. No one intervened. No one called for silence. Everyone understood that this moment didn't belong to the law, but to the truth. Nathan remained standing, both hands gripping the silver necklace, light reflecting off her knuckles like a flicker of fire. She said nothing more, because that question had said everything that needed to be said. In Hale's eyes, she saw something break keying, not anger, but collapse. That look made her realize that the victory today wasn't in bringing him down, but in making him see himself. As the applause began to fade, Nathan returned to her seat, her legs slightly unsteady, but her steps straight and proud. The judge struck his gavel again. His voice lowered, order in the courtroom, but no one heard it as a warning. Among the wooden benches, strangers held each other's hands, and some quietly wiped away tears. The sounds of crying and clapping blended together like a piece of music no one dared interrupt. At the back of the room, an old journalist whispered to a colleague. Justice just spoke not through a verdict, but through a question. Outside, the rain kept falling, tapping steadily on the courthouse roof like applause still echoing from the hearts of those who had witnessed it. In the old apartment on the eastern edge of Houston, yellow light cast down on a worn wooden table, covered in dust and the smell of stale smoke. Outside the window, the night rain faded into long streaks of water on the glass. Leo Hart, a young officer with a tired face, sat at the table, both hands gripping a crumpled sheet of paper. On it were hastily written slanted lines as if scribbled by years of guilt. He stared at the words he had just written, then folded the paper, slipped it into an unmarked white envelope, and let out a long sigh. That breath echoed in the quiet room like a confession to himself. Leo had served in the same unit as Grant Hale, once saw him as an older brother, and once believed Hale's toughness was a shield for the team. But ever since the video spread, he hadn't been able to sleep, memories of training sessions at the old police academy resurfacing like wounds that refused to heal. He remembered clearly what the instructor had once said, his voice hoarse and rough. To survive the streets, make sure they fear you first. That line back then was etched into everyone's mind as a survival command. Leo lowered his head with dark circles under his eyes. In the letter he had written, I was taught that to survive survive, you must prove someone is weaker than you. That phrase, once harmless, had created a whole generation convinced that power was the only way to breathe. He looked up at an old photo on the shelf, a picture of him and Hale when they had just joined the force. Both were smiling, eyes bright, holding brand new badges in their hands. Leo stared at it, then let out a faint laugh, choked with emotion. Back then, we thought justice was a gun. He stood, pulled the curtain shut, and light from the street slipped through a narrow gap and fell onto the envelope on the table. On it, he had written only one line of address, Bell Case Prosecutor's Office. The yellow lamp swayed slightly, casting his shadow long across the wall. For a few seconds, Leo saw Hale's image appear in the dark, the same arrogant gaze as before, now lost and afraid. He took a deep breath, stepped forward, and placed the envelope into his coat pocket, hand clenching tight. "Maybe this is the first time I've truly served justice," he whispered, then turned and walked out the door. The soft click of the door closing echoed gently, but in that space it sounded like the final lock of a long-buried silence breaking open. The next morning, the anonymous envelope arrived at the prosecutor's office. A staff member sorting mail noticed the lack of a postmark and the scribbled handwriting. When opened, it contained only a single sheet of paper, the short, handwritten message signed with two initials, L8. In the letter, Leo described the training sessions, the unspoken orders for officers to assert dominance, the times Hale turned off his camera, and the way superiors turned a blind eye. The reader paused at the final line, "We weren't corrupted. In a day, we were taught to become this way." That afternoon, news of the anonymous witness spread. The courtroom buzzed, reporters crowded in trying to trace the letter's origin. Meanwhile, in a small cafe on the city's south side, Leo sat in silence, his coffee, cold eyes fixed on the window. Rain fell again, and he knew he had chosen a path with no return, but at least it was the first one he walked as a real human being. Prosecutor Mara Quinn sat at the bench holding a thin sheet of paper marked anonymous source. Her voice was hoarse from too many sleepless nights, but her eyes were sharp, the kind of sharp that comes from holding the last piece of a dark puzzle. When the gavel knocked lightly to resume court, Mara stood and slowly stepped into the center of the room. She held up the paper hands, slightly trembling voice, cutting clearly through the silence. "A letter has just been delivered to the prosecutor's office from a police officer who once worked with the defendant, Grant Hale." Murmurs spread across the room, but Mara raised her hand to quiet them. She took a breath, then read on, "I was taught that to survive you must prove someone is weaker than you." The words landed bare, freezing the entire courtroom. The sound of the AC, the raindrops outside, everything stopped in that instant. No one spoke, not even Hale. He looked up, eyes wide, his face stunned as if seeing a version of himself step out from the past. Mara paused, then continued, her voice steady, each word a cold blade slicing through the air. "The letter offers no excuse, no defense. It simply tells a truth that some people were taught to step on others in order to survive. And when an entire generation believes that wrongdoing becomes a skill, no longer a crime." In the audience, Nathan clenched both hands, her heart pounding in her chest. Those who had wept in earlier sessions now bowed their heads again, but not out of sympathy, out of fear. They realized the problem wasn't just a man named Hale, but a machine built on silence. Mara kept reading, her voice steady but heavy. "We weren't corrupted. In a day, we were taught to become this way." That final line rang out like an indictment of an entire system, and everyone in the room knew they were part of it. The judge paused, hand resting on the gavel, his eyes, distant breath, slow and heavy. A reporter typed out the line on his laptop, the screen's glow reflecting off his face. "Wrongdoing doesn't come from action, but from consent." No one said a word. The entire courtroom went so still you could hear heartbeats. Light from the window passed through streaks of rain cast in reflections on the wooden table where Hale sat. He bowed his head, lips moving, but no sound came out. The prosecutor lowered the paper, looked around the room, then spoke slowly. This is no longer the story of one officer's mistake. This is the story of those who turned mistakes into habits and habits into tradition. Her words echoed like a bell, ringing through a collective daze. An elderly woman at the back of the gallery began to cry, tears falling onto her thin hands. A young officer standing guard turned away, gripping his arm tightly, his eyes heavy. No one in that room dared to applaud, nor did anyone speak. Silence spread thick and unmoving, but this time it was no longer the silence of concealment, it was the silence of awareness. Outside, the rain had begun to ease and weak light slipped in through the window frame. A new chapter of the trial was beginning, one where guilt no longer bore the name of an individual but the mark of an entire system, too, used to turning off the truth. The technical room, deep in the courthouse basement, was lit only by pale white ceiling lights and the steady hum of computers running for hours. On the table, a web of decoding devices connected by wires surrounded sealed plastic bags containing hard drives, memory cards, and video files. Technical specialist Armand Lee sat before a screen, eyes fixed on rows of code scrolling past. Each character was a fragment of deleted memory, seconds and minutes slowly pieced together like shards of broken glass. The room was nearly silent save for the CPU fans and the held breaths of those waiting for the truth to surface from the ashes of data. Armand placed his hands on the keyboard, pressed the final key, and a new video clip appeared low-angled, the image slightly shaking. He looked at his colleague and nodded. This is the hidden segment. On the screen, a faint figure emerged in the dim light of a body-worn camera. Grant Hale's voice came through a low, rasping chuckle. No one's recording. I'll be quick. The room fell completely silent. His voice was so clear you could almost feel the shortness of his breath. Armand paused, rewound, played it slower, and the next sound made everyone behind him shudder. A dry, hard thud, followed by something heavy hitting the ground, the scrape of a foot against pavement. Then a choking gasp, faint but sharp enough to pierce every soundproof wall. Noah Bell's voice came next, weak and broken, as if the air was being forced out of her chest. The sound lasted less than 10 seconds, but it froze everyone in place. Armand clenched his hands, his eyes reddened. The engineer beside him whispered, "This is irrefutable." They rewound, increased the volume, and each time it played the sound of a baton striking flesh. Noah's fragile gasps, the friction of shoes on asphalt, all blended into a soundtrack of guilt. A female staffer covered her mouth, tears spilling from her eyes. No one else spoke. Those sounds had said everything. This wasn't a video, it was a witness to the moment a person lost their humanity. Armand saved the original file, signed the verification form, and handed the copy to the prosecutor. As he sealed the hard drive in a plastic bag, he said quietly, "The truth doesn't need images, just sound is enough to make people bow their heads." In the hallway, the footsteps of courthouse staff echoed steadily, but no one paid attention. Everyone in the room remained still, as if they could still hear Noah's final breath playing in their minds. When the recording was played in court the next morning, there were no whispers or reaction. Only the hum of the projector and the heavy breathing of those in the audience remained. Hale's voice echoed through the speaker. "No one's recording, I'll be quick," followed by Noah's choking gasp, brief, sharp, but powerful enough to crack open the protective shell of a system once confident that truth could be erased. In that moment, everyone understood that images could be edited. Words could be twisted, but sound, the rawest, most unfiltered form, was a call no one could silence. And in that sound, justice finally found its voice. In the packed courtroom, white lights from above shone down on the long wooden table where the recording had just finished. The faint hiss of the speaker lingered with the sound of of rain outside the window, but no one in the room dared to move. Everyone sat frozen, as if their breath weighed heavier with each passing second. Nathan Bell sat in the front row, hands clenched tightly, eyes wide on the screen that had just gone black. Her face was pale, her nose, damp lips trembling without sound. As the prosecutor began to rise to collect her files, Nathan suddenly burst into tears, her voice breaking through the silence like a blade. "That's my brother's voice." Her words were hoarse, fragmented, cutting into every heart present. Nathan's sobs shifted the atmosphere. A woman in the audience covered her mouth, others bowed their heads, and the elderly judge gently removed his glasses, his eyes clouded with tears. Prosecutor Mara stood still, her hand holding the file lowered. No one needed to say it, but everyone understood no defense could cover what had just been heard. The voice in the recording, the laughter, the impact, the gasping breath, they had all recreated the cruel moment the city had been forced to face. Nathan bowed her head, shoulders shaking, her tears soaking into the wood of the table, dissolving under the pale light. She tried to breathe, but her throat tightened, her voice coming out soft and strained. "We've lived with that fear since we were born, but he carried it away from me." In the back row of the press section, those once used to writing without emotion now paused their pens. A silver-haired man took a deep breath, his voice low but steady in the dense silence. "No more evidence is needed." The quiet words echoed like a bell rung in a sanctuary. The judge looked around, his eyes resting on Nathan, then turning to the defendant, who sat silently with his head lowered. Grant Hale remained still, hands clasped his eyes, vacant lips pressed tightly together, but the muscles in his face trembled as if each word from the recording was reverberating back into his mind. Outside the window, the rain cleared the last drops falling onto the wooden eaves. Inside the courtroom, no one spoke another word. The judge tapped the gavel, gently, not to command, but to close the heavy moment. His voice came out steady, hoarse with emotion. "The evidence is sufficient." A short silence followed his word. Then the entire room stood not out of ceremony, but out of respect for the truth. Everyone present shared the same feeling. They had just heard something no image could convey, the final breath of a human being, and the conscience of a society stirred awake. Nathan remained standing, both hands gripping her father's necklace, tears falling unbrushed. The dim light reflected on the desk where one of those tears landed, blending into the unfinished court transcript. No further arguments were needed, no more conclusions required. In that room, the truth had spoken for itself, and justice, after so many days of silence, finally had a human face. In the afternoon, late sunlight filtered through the courtroom windows, casting slanted golden streaks across the bench. The air remained still, the scent of paper files and sweat mixing with the dampness of the morning rain, all settling into heaviness no one could name. On the defendant's bench, Grant Hale sat with his head bowed, hands cuffed in front of his chest. His prison collar slightly creased, his eyes sunken like someone who had passed a sleepless night. The light caught his skin with a reddish hue, each line on his face visible, thin and hollow. The courtroom waited in silence, only the soft whistle of wind brushing through the window frame. The judge looked down and spoke evenly. "Does the defendant wish to say anything before the jury deliberates?" Hale lifted his head, his eyes red, lips trembling, hands clenched so tightly the veins stood out. A second passed like a lifetime before he spoke, voice hoarse and slow. "I was just following orders." The words made some in the courtroom lower their heads, and hers shook theirs. Hale paused, inhaled, his voice cracking. "I was afraid of being called weak, afraid of being seen as someone too soft to survive in the unit. I thought if I used force, they'd respect me." He stopped again, a trembling hand wiping away the tears spilling out, a strained smile appearing on his distorted face. "But I was wrong. I thought I was proving strength, but really I was proving my own cowardice. Behind him, Nathan watched quietly, her eyes cold, but no longer angry, only tired with a trace of pity. Prosecutor Mara set her pen down, her hand slightly shaken, while the defense attorney kept his head bowed, unable to look at his client. The judge gave a small nod, his eyes both stern and sorrowful. "You said you feared being weak," he said slowly, "and you chose weakness before justice." The words echoed through the room, slow and sharp, like a verdict without being declared. Hale dropped his head, tears falling onto his cuffed hands, the clear drops spreading across rough skin. The judge continued, his tone deeper. "There are orders that are not worth obeying because when you turned off the camera, you turned off the human part of yourself." Each word came deliberately heavy enough for everyone present to feel their weight. Hale knotted his mouth, moving voice choked. "I understand now. Too late, but I understand." His words shattered against the ceiling, reverberating across all four walls. In the back row, a journalist lowered his camera, not taking a photo, because no lens could capture what was unfolding, a man unraveling in the light of late afternoon. Outside, sunlight streamed through the window frame, casting a long beam across the floor that reached all the way to the defendant's table. Hale stared at that light, his eyes drained. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said softly. "I just hope someone in the force will have the courage to stop sooner than I did." His voice faded, nearly dissolving into the air. The judge remained silent, lowered his head to jot down a few notes, then set his pen aside, his gaze distant. In that moment, the room fell still again, filled only by the ticking of the clock and the heavy breath of a man who had just confessed. The final shaft of sunlight touched Hale's face, making his tears shimmer like glass, and someone in the gallery whispered, "Justice doesn't need hate, only someone willing to admit they were wrong." The light from the courthouse's tall window slanted in, falling across Grant Hale's face as he looked around one last time. It illuminated his sunken eyes, once proud, now hollow with regret. On his gray, sleep-deprived skin, the light drew lines that made his face seem both real and ghost-like, half man, half guilt. Sweat beaded on his forehead, trailing down the curve of his cheek, mixing with tears left unwiped. The room stayed quiet, the judge's pen tapping on the bench the only sound. Nathan sat in the front row, her hand resting on her father's silver necklace, eyes fixed on Hale with a gaze no longer of hatred but closure. The light caught her eyes, giving them the calm sheen of someone who has crossed through pain. The judge rose slowly, adjusting his black robe, his voice steady in the hushed courtroom. After reviewing all evidence, testimony, and the conduct of the defendant, Grant Hale, the court hereby sentences. The entire room held its breath, every eye trained on the bench. He paused, briefly, looked down at the paper in his hand, then read each word with clarity and weight. 15 years in prison for bodily harm resulting in serious injury and obstruction of justice. The words fell heavily, but spread like a breeze of release. A few in the gallery began to cry, sobs mixing with quiet sighs of relief. Hale bowed his head, eyes closed, shoulders trembling slightly. In that instant, he looked like a child left alone amid the wreckage of his own making. The defense attorney placed a hand on his shoulder, but Hale did not respond, only whispered, "I heard her voice." The judge struck his gavel one final time, the sharp thud of wood marking the end of a long journey through tears and truth. Mara, the prosecutor, stood and gave Nathan a slight nod, a wordless farewell. The afternoon light spilled across the courtroom floor, drawing lines that looked like the boundary between guilt and cleansing. And then, from the back row, a round of applause broke out, solitary at first, then quickly spreading across the room. The sound wasn't loud, but it carried weight, echoing like a farewell from justice to those who had waited too long. One man stood, then another, and within seconds the entire courtroom was clapping. There were tears mixed in hands trembling with emotion, but all of it merged into a single rhythm. The breath of fairness just revived. Nathan rose, looking around, her eyes wet but bright. She said nothing, only nodded gently as if sending a message to her father, her sister, and all the silenced souls. Hale was led away, his shadow stretching across the floor, fading into the last light of the afternoon. The courtroom doors closed, but the applause still still echoed like the aftersound of hope rediscovered. Outside, the clouds began to clear, and faint rays of sunlight broke through the rain-wet porch, shining on the stone plaque engraved with Justice Hall. In that light, everyone understood justice, even when late carries the sound of humanity, the sound of truth, of courage, and of hearts that no longer stay silent. Late afternoon, the Houston sky carried a pale yellow-gray hue, the last sunlight slipping through tall buildings, shining down on the courthouse steps where a crowd still packed the plaza. The air was thick with the scent of rain and heat rising from the damp pavement, mixed with the chaotic sounds of broadcast vans, crackling microphones, people calling out, and chants from the crowd. The courthouse doors had just closed when Nathan Bell stepped out onto the high steps, her hair tousled by the wind, her face visibly tired, but her eyes holding a rare calm. She paused under the harsh glare of dozens of cameras pointed her way, her hands still gripping the old silver necklace she had worn since the first day of the trial. A reporter stepped forward, voice slightly shaken but urgent. "Nathan, can you tell us how you feel about today's verdict? Do you believe justice has been served?" Nathan raised her head, her eyes steady on the lens, her voice slow but firm. "We didn't win, we survived." The words rippled through the microphones, echoed from the loudspeakers, and reached the gates where hundreds waited. A beat of silence passed, then the crowd erupted chants, bursting out, merging with applause and muffled sobs. Many raised phones to record screens glowing in the sunset. Reporters stopped writing, glanced at one another, and someone whispered, "That's the perfect ending to a long journey." Nathan stepped down a few steps, facing the sea of people, waiting the courthouse behind her, where justice had just been spoken, and in front of her, unfamiliar faces sharing the same pain. A group of students held up a large sign, the words "Breathe" for Noah, painted in white, glowing under torchlight. A light breeze made the banner sway, reflecting shimmering light like the heartbeat of a crowd breathing as one for someone else. Nathan saw it, her lips pressed tight, her eyes wet, but she didn't wipe them. Beside her, a small girl held her mother's hand, holding up a wrinkled drawing of two sisters with a childlike scrawl below, "We can still breathe." News networks streamed the moment live images of Nathan among the crowd, spreading across millions of screens, no longer a symbol of a victim, but one of resilience. The lights cast her face in gentle relief against the dusk, tears falling softly, yet her smile slowly formed. Another reporter asked, "Do you have anything to say to those who've stood up for you and your sister?" Nathan glanced around, her eyes settling on the white banner in the crowd, and replied, "Today we didn't close a case. We opened a new way to live, one where breathing is no longer treated as a privilege." As she stepped down the final stairs, the chant "Breathe" for Noah rose louder, echoing off the courthouse walls, carried by the evening wind. The sun dipped behind the buildings, its last light falling across Nathan's face, making her appear as if she were glowing amid the darkness settling in. The courthouse doors closed behind her, but another door, of awakening, of belief, of true justice, had opened in the hearts of the thousands standing outside. And in that moment, the city of Houston seemed to breathe again, relieved and full of hope. In the distance, across the courtyard beside the courthouse, flashing police lights cast harsh reflections on the wet stone, washing the wall in blue and red. Grant Hale was escorted out the back door, his hands cuffed, head bowed, steps heavy. Each movement dragged his past across the ground, leaving fading footprints in the puddles. A young officer walking beside him turned his head slightly, avoiding Hale's gaze, perhaps out of shame, perhaps out of fear of seeing himself in it. On the other side of the glass corridor, Nathan Bell walked past with a group of reporters just a few meters away, but the look in Hale's eyes through the misted glass made that distance feel endless. He paused briefly, his eyes meeting hers, no longer arrogant, no longer contemptuous, but hollow. The look of someone who had lost the most important thing, belief in himself. Nathan turned away, but she still felt that cold stare clinging to her back like a silent goodbye. The prisoner transport van pulled out of the lot, tires rolling over damp concrete with a steady hiss. Street lamp light caught the glass, reflecting Hale's blurred face, half lit, half-shadowed. He looked through the small window as raindrops began to fall, trailing long streaks down the glass. The streets outside sped by, familiar neighborhoods, patrol routes he once knew now distant and alien. He thought of the final moments in court, of Nathan's voice, of the judge's words, "And you chose weakness in the face of justice." Those words echoed, blending with the rain, becoming a sound he knew would never leave his memory. In the city, the rain came as if it had been waiting. Each drop fell heavy, striking the pavement, the awnings, then merging into fast-flowing streams, carrying away the dust, the trash, and the traces of a long, turbulent day. Those standing outside the courthouse rushed to find shelter, while a few remained holding signs that read, "Breathe for Noah," letting the rain mix with their tears, indistinguishable from one another. Nathan looked up at the sky, her hair soaked, her clothes clinging with rain, but she didn't back away. In that rain, the noise of cameras, reporters, and the crowd seemed to dissolve, leaving only the sound of water falling steady, softening all anger and pain. On the highway, the van, carrying Hales, sped into the thick rain. He pressed his forehead against the cold glass, watching the droplets streak down like tears that never fell. In that moment, he whispered something no one would ever hear. "I wish I'd stopped sooner." The rain poured harder, each wave of water slapping against the van, its roar drowning out every remaining sound. Inside the courthouse, Nathan walked toward the door, the rain hitting her face, bringing with it the chill of truth. Amid flashing lights and the dispersing crowd, the city felt cleansed, quiet, and calm. The words left unspoken, the truths no one dared admit, all dissolved into the rain as if nature itself had stepped in to do what humanity had waited too long to begin, to wash away the guilt and return to the world a cleaner breath. 1 year had passed, and the city of Houston had changed its shape. Today the sky was clear, soft sunlight falling across the courtyard of a high school where a memorial was being held for Noah Bell, the girl who once made an entire nation pause to listen. The schoolyard was simply decorated, rows of chairs, neatly arranged flags at half-mast, and in the center stood a large screen covered in a white cloth. Students in uniform lined up holding sunflowers. The flower, Noah once said, always turns toward the light, even when everything is darkest. The speakers came to life with a calm voice, inviting everyone to a moment of silence. A light breeze passed through, making the flag flutter, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and last night's rain. On the screen, a 58-second clip began to play. The footage was shaky, the light and harsh with shouting sirens, and finally, Noah's faint voice saying, "If my father saw this, he'd be ashamed of your skin." All other sounds fell away, leaving only that voice echoing. Everyone in the courtyard stood still, some bowed their heads, others closed their eyes. The wind brushed past, carrying that voice as if from somewhere far away. The video ended, the screen stayed black for a few seconds. Then a line of white text appeared. 58 seconds can take a life or change the world. In the front row, Nathan Bell sat between her mother and the school principal, her face composed but her eyes glistening. She wore a simple black dress, a small sunflower pin fastened at the collar. As the words appeared on screen, her hand gripped the silver necklace, once her father's, then passed to her sister until the final day. A camera recorded the moment, quietly, with no flashes, no noise. A student stood and read aloud the tribute. She left the world in 58 seconds, but the world will need years to understand what she left behind. Applause rose slow and steady, not to honor, but to thank her. At the edge of the yard, a group of young officers in crisp uniforms bowed their heads. Among them was Leo Hart, the one who had sent the anonymous letter. He held his hat to his chest, eyes fixed on the screen where Noah's face faded into white light. The guilt he once carried still lingered, but it had softened with the belief that what she did was not in vain. Across the courtyard, parents stood quietly, many holding their children's hands, their gazes mixed with grief and gratitude. As the ceremony ended, Nathan stepped up to the podium, her voice soft yet resonant. Those 58 seconds didn't just take a life. They opened up a dream for thousands of others, the dream of breathing in a more just world. She bowed her head, the light shining on her hair reflecting as a thin beam like a ribbon of hope. Everyone simultaneously placed their sunflowers on the steps before the screen, forming a brilliant yellow carpet. In the distance, children laughed and played, their voices blending with the windlight as a promise that the past was no longer a wound, but the beginning of something new, something that takes only 58 seconds to understand, but a lifetime to protect. The evening breeze swept through the schoolyard, carrying the rustling sound of dry leaves, as if whispering to the space now filled with emotion. When the final line on the screen faded, the light dimmed and the whole yard fell into absolute silence. From the teacher's row, a middle-aged woman quietly wiped away a tear. She had once taught Noah Bell history, once seen the girl standing in the middle of class with bright eyes and a question that silenced everyone. If justice had a color, whose color should it be? Now, as the memory returned, her tears fell endlessly, not out of sorrow, but out of love for a soul that taught the world to ask again. The students saw her cry, and no one said a word. They simply stood up together. The folding chairs made a soft, synchronized sound, steady and gentle like a ritual. The entire courtyard became a sea of people in black, young faces, carrying the solemn calm of those who had just learned their first lesson in dignity. Each person held a sunflower, its bright yellow bloom like the last bit of sunlight left after the storm. Light filtered through the trees, falling on lowered faces, each tear becoming a fleck of brightness in the air. The teacher stood still, both hands clutching an old grade book where Noah's name still sat on the third line of the class list. She no longer wiped her tears, letting them stream freely because they carried a feeling both painful and proud. Beside her, one of Noah's former classmates, now a college student, bowed his head quietly and whispered, "She made us brave enough to say what we believe." The air went still as if the whole world held its breath. The loudspeaker had gone silent, leaving only the sound of wind, the soft rustle of fabric, and the steady breathing of hundreds of people standing still. The moment of silence stretched on. No one looked away. Every gaze remained fixed on the blank screen where Noah's image had just faded. Though the wind carried dust and the light shone harshly, no one blinked. They stood there like a statue of grief and reverence, as if afraid that even a glance away might let the memory slip. A small child in the back whispered, "Can she hear us?" The innocent question made the schoolyard even quieter. Nathan turned her gaze, softening her voice as light as breath. "She's here, in everyone who knows how to cherish their breath." The words drifted with the wind dissolving into the golden light of late afternoon. Still, no one moved. In that silence, people realize that some lessons need no books, some moments need no speeches. All it takes is to stand together unflinching to face the truth, a truth that took 58 seconds to happen and a whole generation not to forget. Morning at the Houston Police Academy began with an unusually heavy silence. The main training hall, where recruits were usually lectured on tactics and discipline, was so quiet today that the sound of a pen tapping lightly on a desk could be heard. On the wall, a large screen lit up the opening slide reading Case Study 58 Seconds, the Bell Incident. All eyes turned toward it, and no one spoke. A few sat up straighter, a few took deep breaths as if about to face something heavier than any fitness test or shooting drill. The lead instructor, a man who had served for more than 20 years, entered with a remote in hand, his voice steady. "Today you'll watch a video you're required to remember for the rest of your careers." He pressed the button and the room dimmed. On the screen, a blurry image appeared, followed by the raspy laugh of Grant Hale. "No one's filming, I'll do it quick." Then came the choking sounds, the strike of a baton, then silence. not a sound in the room. The young recruits sat motionless, eyes wide open. When the video stopped at the 58th second, the screen's glow lit up the front rows, revealing tense faces. Some swallowed hard, others looked down. The instructor turned off the projector, switched the lights back on. He didn't speak right away, letting the silence stretch. Then he pointed at the blank screen, his voice rough but firm. That was 58 seconds that changed everything. Not because someone fell, but because someone forgot who they were. He turned to face the class, eyes stern but heavy. When you wear this uniform, it doesn't make you stronger than anyone. It only reminds you that everything you do must stand in the light. Every time you reach to turn off that camera, understand you're also turning off your chance to save yourself. He clicked again, and this time the screen showed a single line in white on a black background. Don't switch off the truth. The room fell still again, that line reflecting in the eyes of the young recruits, sinking deep into their mind. A female cadet stood up, her voice trembling. "Sir, does he Hale? Does he still count as a police officer?" The instructor looked at her, his gaze heavy. He was once a cop, but he is no longer a protector. That line was crossed the moment he hit the switch. He paused, took a breath, then added, "We don't train to become stronger than others. We train to understand where strength must stop." Light filtered through the window, casting soft beams across faces deep in thought. In that moment, the academy wasn't just a place for physical training, but a place where people relearned how to be human. In the corner, a small photo of Noah Bell sat next to the screen, the light wood frame catching the morning sun. No one was asked to bow their heads, but they all did. On the screen, the words, "Don't switch off." The truth remained lit, a warning, not just for the profession, but for how people look at themselves. The air in the training room was so thick, it felt like any words would be unnecessary after the line, "Don't switch off." The truth faded from the screen. The instructor stood still, arms crossed, his gaze sweeping across the young faces, deep in thought. A few cadets looked down, others continued to stare at the spot where the screen had glowed. The heaviness pressed on their chests, each person facing themselves not as future officers, but as human beings confronting a question of morality. In the silence, a voice rose from the middle row, slightly shaky but clear. "Sir, if it had been me in that moment, would I have done differently?" The question made the entire room look up almost at once. The speaker was a young recruit, just 21, his eyes still bright but filled with worry. He looked straight at the instructor, his voice carrying a fear everyone in the room had felt at some point, the fear that power might make you betray what you believe in. The instructor held his gaze for a long moment, his eyes tired and deep, as if he had seen thousands of similar faces over the course of his career. He didn't answer right away, walked slowly to the table, poured a glass of water, then turned back, his voice firm and low, striking like a hammer. "You would if you're still capable of shame." The room froze. The ceiling fan creaked, wind hissed softly through a window crack, all blending into the deep silence. The instructor stepped forward, light from the window catching his face, the lines near his mouth stark. He continued slowly but steadily. "Cops aren't made to be perfect. You will make mistakes, feel fear, and get angry. But if the day comes when you look in the mirror and find yourself justifying what's wrong and feel no shame, then you've become what the world should fear." The room stayed perfectly still, no one tapping pens or shifting chairs. The instructor looked up at the small photo of Noah Bell placed at the corner of the desk, light reflecting off the glass made her face seem to smile faintly. He turned back to the class, locking eyes with each of them. The difference between cruelty and courage lies in a very small moment, the moment you realize you could do wrong and choose not to because you know it's wrong. He paused, nodded gently at the young cadet. "If you still have the courage to ask that question, you still have the chance to be different." The sound of pens writing slowly returned. Some students took note notes, others stared down at their desks, eyes red. Morning light stretched across the wall, reflecting the words, "Don't switch off the truth," as if etched into the air itself. Outside the window, wind fluttered through the academy's blue and white flags, their soft flapping blending with the quiet breaths in the room. In that moment, everyone understood the lesson wasn't just about professional ethics, but about the final boundary between humanity and power, the only thing you can truly hold on to if you still know how to bow before the truth. The state prison sat in a windswept stretch of land where tall, moss-covered walls and coils of barbed wire shimmered under the harsh afternoon sun. In Block A, Room 217, Grant Hale sat at a metal desk, a blank sheet of paper, and a worn-down pencil in front of him. Light from a small window cast across his face, highlighting the dark circles under his eyes and the skin weathered by time. Each word appeared slowly, carefully, as if he were writing fragments of his own soul. Outside, the steady rhythm of guards' boots echoed, mixing with the soft squeak of a ceiling fan. Hale paused, looked down at the page, and pressed his lips together. A drop of sweat fell, spreading across the first line. "Dear Nathan Bell." He began to write the strokes, awkward but sincere. "I've thought a lot, and I've come to see that what made me cruel wasn't the order I followed, but the fear I obeyed. You were right. I was afraid of being seen as weak, so I chose to be violent to cover that fear. I thought strength was making others afraid of me until I realized I was the weakest person in that room. Every night I hear that choking breath again, those 58 seconds looping in my head like a sentence that never ends." He lifted his head, looking out the window where streaks of late sunlight stretched across the concrete yard. His voice cracked as he whispered to himself, "You don't know. I've wished someone had stopped me before I shut off the last bit of light left in me." The pencil moved again, shaky and uneven. "I'm not asking for forgiveness because I know I don't deserve it. But if you can read this letter and believe that I finally understood what I used to ignore, justice isn't power, it's responsibility. I hope you'll use that pain to do what I failed to do, to make sure people like me never get the chance to turn off the truth again." He folded the letter with care, his calloused hands trembling slightly. A guard approached, nodded, took the letter, gave a glance, and walked away. Hale sat still, looking out at the yard where the last rays of sun disappeared behind the fence. 2 weeks later, in her small apartment, Nathan Bell opened the envelope marked with the prison seal. She sat by the window, morning light falling across the slightly yellowed paper. When she read the line, "I was afraid of being weak, so I chose to be cruel," her hand clenched and a tear dropped, blurring the word afraid. A breeze drifted through the curtain, making the letter quiver slightly, as if the writer himself was whispering something left unsaid. Nathan folded the letter, set it on the table, and closed her eyes for a long moment. She didn't feel anger nor forgiveness, only a quiet breath released deep and soft. The sunlight touched the page, casting a faint glow, and in that moment she felt the past closing, not through forgetting, but through understanding. Inside the small apartment, Nathan Bell remained seated in silence. The morning sunlight now faded to a soft strip casting across the letter resting on the table. She reread the final line, her hand gently tracing the uneven handwriting, each letter holding the breath of a soul in repentance. Her eyes stopped at the sentence written more boldly than the rest, as if it had been carved with all the weight of regret. "I was afraid of being weak, so I chose to be cruel." In Nathan's mind, Hale's voice echoed, mixed with the distant sound of memory, then dissolved into silence. She placed the letter down, gazing out the window, where the light had turned pale gold, dimming with the afternoon. Her voice was low, almost to herself. "The one who apologizes may be forgiven, but memory never is." The words rang out, simple yet heavy, like a final conclusion to all that had come before. That afternoon she brought the letter to the Institute for Justice Archives and Museum, where items from the Bell case, the case that had reshaped the entire state's legal system, were on display. A museum staff member, an elderly man with a slow gait, received the envelope from her with both hands. He opened it gently, glanced briefly at the uneven writing, then looked up with eyes filled with reverence and sorrow. Nathan nodded. "I think this belongs here, so others can read it and understand that the price of a mistake isn't only measured in years behind bars." The curator stayed silent for a few seconds, then replied, "Sometimes a letter of confession says more than a sentence ever could." Months later, in the quiet halls of the museum, the letter was placed inside a glass case at the center of the main exhibit, beside a photograph of Noah Bell smiling brightly at the graduation she never made it to. Under the soft lighting, the paper showed its age-yellowed ink, smudged corners, worn, but every word remained clear. A small plaque sat beneath it reading, "Letter from former officer Grant Hale, written from state prison, addressed to Nathan Bell. An apology cannot erase the past, but it may cause us to look back." Visitors lingered longer at this corner, some quietly reading, others standing before the photo, lips pressed together as if holding back tears. In that space, footsteps echoed softly. Conversations lowered to murmurs, leaving behind a reverent stillness, as if standing before a confession turned symbol. On the wall, behind the glass case, large steel letters were etched. "The one who apologizes may be forgiven, but memory never is." Light fell upon the inscription, casting its reflection across the room like a reminder to every generation that wears power that justice does not reside in courtrooms, but in how people remember wrongdoing. In the far corner, Nathan stood still, her hand gently touching the glass, a faint smile on her lips, fragile but at peace. The letter had found its place not in resentment but in collective memory, where past and truth coexisted, to remind the world that an apology only matters when we choose not to forget. On a late autumn afternoon, the sun set over Harper Bridge, where the steel beams had faded with time and the sound of the river below lapped steadily against the supports. The last light of day passed through the rusted railing, casting a warm orange glow across Nathan Bell's face, as if a layer of memory had settled over her skin. In her hands was a bouquet of sunflowers, carefully wrapped in white paper, the vibrant yellow petals reaching toward the light, a symbol of the sister who had fallen here. Nathan knelt and placed the bouquet beside a small plaque that read, "Noah Bell Memorial, 58 seconds that changed the world." Beneath the engraving were scrawled notes and marker messages from passers-by, students, and young officers who had come to bow their heads. She sat on the edge of the bridge, her hand brushing the cold metal where traces remained from the times flowers had been replaced. Wind moved through her hair, carrying the scent of the river and faint smoke from afar. The city below pulsed with life, but up here, time seemed to stop. Nathan looked up at the sky, now turning pale violet, and the light scattered across the water, blending everything into a single view. Footsteps echoed behind her. A man led a boy, maybe 6 years old. The child paused, stared at the plaque for a long time, then looked up and asked, "Mister, are you afraid of the police?" The innocent question made Nathan turn slightly, her expression softening. She looked at the boy, smiled gently, then answered in a calm, warm voice, "No, not afraid. I'm only afraid of those who forget why they wear the uniform." The boy stayed silent, eyes wide as if trying to understand. The man beside him nodded slowly, tightening his grip on his son's hand. He spoke quietly, "We stand here to remember, so that the next time you see someone in uniform, you'll hope they remember this too." The boy bent down and placed a small flower next to the sunflowers, his small hand trembling but steady. The evening wind grew stronger, carrying a few petals across the water, where the reflected sunset made them shimmer like tiny flecks of gold drifting away. Nathan watched them, a mix of pain and peace rising in her chest. She whispered, "You see, this sister, the world is still learning how to breathe with you." The river answered in soft murmurs like a voice from beyond. In the distance, streetlights flickered on, casting a glow over the memorial plaque where the words, Breathe for Noah had been re-engraved after last year's commemoration. Passers-by paused, some taking photos, others simply standing in silence. Above them, the last traces of sunlight faded into the golden bridge lights. Nathan rose, adjusting the bouquet, her gaze steady as she looked down at the river. In that moment, at the very place where loss once unfolded, the space glowed gently with a different light. The light of memory, a belief that justice does not die with people, but lives on in each generation that chooses to bow before the truth. The river wind swept through, carrying a hint of salt, making the hem of Nathan Bell's dress sway gently. She stood by the railing of the bridge, looking down at the water bathed in golden light, the very place that had witnessed the tragedy which changed the entire city. The little boy still looked up at her, his eyes clear and curious. His innocent question still lingered in the air, prompting Nathan to tilt her head slightly, a faint smile appearing on her lip. Her voice came slowly, deep but firm, afraid no. But I want them to fear being wrong. That answer made the man beside her lower his head slightly, his shoulders trembling, perhaps from emotion. And the boy remained still, as if trying to absorb the full meaning of those words. Simple language, carrying a lesson on courage and the limits of power. Nathan looked up at the last rays of light stretching from the horizon, a mix of orange and purple, covering the water's surface. Each small wave shimmered against the bridge, flickering like hundreds of tiny mirrors, reflecting her image, thin but strong. She squinted slightly, and in that light, Noah's face seemed to emerge from the water, her smile still as gentle as it once was. Nathan whispered, "If justice had a form, it might look like this light, brilliant, but easy to lose if people turn away." Her hand rested on the edge of the bridge, feeling the cold steel beneath her skin, the place where her sister once stood, where pain had been washed away by millions of tears and promises that could never be broken. A new gust of wind came stronger this time, making the sunflowers near the memorial plaque tremble, a few petals lifting and drifting down the river. The boy reached out to catch them, but his father gently placed a hand on his shoulder and said softly, "Let them go, son. The light will carry them where they need to be." The boy nodded, eyes still following the drifting petals, the reflected sunlight making them glow so brightly that anyone watching had to squint. Nathan stood still, a strange feeling rising in her chest, part sorrow, part peace. She knew she had lived through pain not to forget, but to hold on to its meaning. The sun had fully set, leaving a thin band of light stretched across the river. That glow reflected on the water sharp and bright, like a warning to all that justice is not some distant, abstract idea, but found in every action, every choice people make. Names of verdicts might be forgotten, but no one forgets the moment they realize a small decision can change the course of someone's life. Nathan bowed her head slightly as closed for a few seconds, then opened them. Her gaze, lit by the sunset, no longer filled with grief but with belief. She turned and walked away from the bridge, each step slow and steady behind her, the water still glittering as if holding on to the image of the Bell sisters, one who remained with the wind and one who lived to keep that light from ever going out. The morning was bright with sunlight as hundreds gathered in the courtyard of the newly inaugurated Bell Foundation for Justice. On the podium, Nathan Bell, dressed in a simple suit, stood among white banners. The early wind, lifting the red ribbon, stretched across the gate. Below her were reporters, law students, former police officers, and citizens from all over, all silent, waiting for the moment she would speak. Nathan lifted the scissors over the ribbon, the light glinting off the blade in a thin flash. Then came the sharp, clean sound of the cut. She drew a breath, her voice calm and steady through the microphone. "We don't want anyone to have to beg to live." The words fell slowly but firmly, quieting the entire courtyard. Those in the front row looked at each other, some nodding, some with tears in their eyes. Behind her, a curtain dropped to reveal a bronze statue depicting two hands, one grasping everyone supporting, symbolizing the bond between justice and compassion. At the base of the statue, a line, etched in shining steel, glimmered in the morning sun. No one should beg for mercy under the law. The light reflecting off the letters made them seem alive, casting their glow across the faces of those standing nearby, each one carrying a different expression: contemplation, emotion, hope. Nathan stared at the words for a long moment, her lips moving softly as if repeating them. No one should beg for justice, because justice must belong to everyone. Applause broke out in waves spreading across the square. Yellow flower petals were released from above, drifting in the sunlight, falling around the glowing bronze statue. Nathan looked up, her eyes filled with quiet conviction. In that moment, she knew the years of pain had been transformed into strength, and justice, once suffocated, had now been rewritten not in tears but by hands that chose to act. Across the sky, the light spread wide like a promise that from this day forward no one would have to bow their head before the law. The cameras panned slowly, capturing the image of Nathan Bell standing before the statue, sunlight filtering through the trees, casting soft shadows across her face. Amid thunderous applause and the gentle rain of yellow petals, she smiled a trembling smile, touched with tears. The light shimmered on the tear rolling down her cheek, sparkling like the crystallization of every sorrow, every memory, every day she had to learn to stand in the ashes of loss. That smile was not one of triumph, but of release. As the lens came to rest, the frame became a symbol still in the crowd before the beauty of someone who has known pain and still chooses to believe. Nathan looked straight into the camera and nodded gently, as if sending a message to all who had ever been hurt. Justice is not born in courtrooms, but in hearts that know how to care. The background sounds headed, leaving only the wind rustling through the trees, the laughter of children in a corner of the courtyard, and the soft hum of a camera on a clear morning. Above the sky stretched a deep, clean blue, untouched by any trace of darkness. Sunlight poured over the bronze statue, making the words, "No one should beg for mercy under the law," glow like fire, bright and warm. Everyone stood still. No one spoke, but their eyes all turned in the same direction, toward a place where justice was no longer a distant concept, but a real and present belief. In that moment, the sound of a gavel seemed to fade, replaced by the stillness of hearts newly awakened. Nathan tilted her head slightly, breathed deeply, letting the morning wind sweep through her hair, and in her eyes was something simple yet profound. Justice doesn't resound in a hammer's strike, but in the awakening of human conscience. Houston's morning blazed with sunlight. The rows of trees along the avenue swayed gently in the breeze, their reflections dancing across the glass facade of the new building named Bell Foundation for Justice. In that setting, the image of Nathan Bell in a white shirt standing before her sister Noah's bronze statue seemed to hold the weight of an entire journey, one who fell so the world would wake up, and one who chose to rise and carry that path forward. Everything began on a morning on Harper Street, where a seemingly small act exposed the nature of an entire system, where the fear of appearing weak led someone to lose themselves. But after the shouts, after 58 seconds that ended a life, the world began to listen. Through a viral video, through court hearings, through articles and tears, people slowly learned that justice cannot stand if it is built on silence. Now, a year later, the city is still bustling as always, but its heart has changed. Young officers learn the lesson of responsibility before stepping onto the streets. Citizens no longer bow their heads when demanding truth, and children grow up believing that justice is not a favor. Nathan stands there not as a victim, but as the keeper of memory for a generation. She understands that change doesn't come from rage, but from the ability to turn pain into strength. Her smile through tears at the inauguration wasn't an ending, but a sign that light can still rise from the darkest places. As the ceremonial music played, sunlight fell on the inscription beneath the statue. No one should beg for mercy under the law. Everyone present felt something larger than court rulings. It was awareness. The story of the Bell sisters wasn't one of hatred, but of human courage to stand for what's right, even knowing it could cost everything. And when the camera paused on Nathan's smile, the Houston sky remained clear, as if to remind the world that justice doesn't echo through a gavel's strike, but through hearts that know how to listen, how to love, and how to choose the light even when it means stepping out of the dark.